you're here and joining us. It's Monday night at 7 p.m. That means that it is our weekly expert series here at the CARES program. If this is your first time here with the CARES program, we want to let you know that CARES stands for Communities and Relatives Empowered for Support. And the support is specifically for those who are working with individuals, family members, friends who may be struggling with substance misuse. Every Monday we gather here, we bring a new expert to share information, and the idea is that we want to promote education, provide support, and share resources. And the resources and information you get live, you get every week from the experts that are doing this work and are passionate about that work. And this week I'm very happy to present our speaker, Drew Dutton, who has been with us before, has been amazing, and you're in for a treat. So if you've ever been to a class where you're being lectured on brain science, you have never gone through an awesome class the way Drew does it. So, and I'm not overselling it. Let me tell a little bit about Drew. Drew is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor, a licensed chemical dependency counselor, and has been working in the field of treatment and prevention, specifically with adolescents and substance use treatment. Nearly a decade and a half of hands-on experience in plenty of leadership role. Currently, he holds the position as president and CEO of Phoenix House, Texas, which is a statewide nonprofit organization with a strong track record in addiction prevention and treatment services. You should also know that Drew is instrumental when it comes to this dedication of crafting innovative, evidence-based programs designed to tackle the complexities of addiction with an overarching philosophy that underscores the importance of experiential, informed, solution-focused, and positive interventions. We have a speaker here who has a commitment to combat addiction stigma and advance the field in a more robust and constructive direction. You should know, too, that he is a nationally recognized speaker. Oh, I've got plenty to share. I'm going to keep going here for a bit here. But main thing is that he also serves as an adjunct professor at Texas Christian University and at the University of Mary, where he guides graduate students specializing in professional counseling. So, Drew, thank you so much for taking the time. As always, our speakers have the microphone. Yeah. We've talked about having a conversation throughout. Sure. I'll have lots of questions, and then we'll wrap up a little bit and open up the space for those who have questions online or here in person. So without further ado, Drew, it's all yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me back. I'm happy to be here. I really love the initiative and program and had a really good time the first time I got to do this. So a big initiative of mine I thought fit really well with this, and that's our workshop called Project Empathy. And I came last time, did my terrible drawings, got good feedback, asked to come do them again. So if you saw those, I've tried to add in some new stuff, but some of you might realize I'm kind of a one-trick pony with this national recognition, but it'll be good. And really, that's all I try to do to bridge the gap. I was talking with you earlier. I think there's so much good information out there when it comes to the neuroscience of addiction and really being able to understand addiction as a brain disease. But I think the problem is all of those individuals, no disrespect intended, don't necessarily do the best job at conveying that in a way that's easy to digest and understand. And I think that when people really can understand what's happening in the brain from a neuroscience perspective, we really do, when we say disease and a reward system being hijacked, what that actually means. And we quickly realize, how much our approaches need to change to the way we've approached addiction, and how so much of the prevention and treatment methods that are currently in place and still in place to this day are not only unhelpful but actively harmful to people dealing with addiction. So that's my goal, is grab every microphone I can and try to talk about what that looks like, and kind of go through that and interrupt, ask questions as you guys want. But my goal is that this definition by ASAM that I've got up on the screen becomes digestible for everyone, and that's understanding that first and foremost, addiction is preventable and treatable. And I think that that's where we need to start in understanding that this is a very solvable disease. It is something that we have all of the necessary resources to treat. It has higher success treatment rates than most medical conditions. It is just a overarching stigma and misunderstanding that lead to the lack of available resources or people being willing to connect with resources that work better. It has a lower relapse rate than those dealing with hypertension or asthma, but we think of it as being different for whatever reason.
So Drew, can I ask you
Yeah.
real quick, when you say that it has a higher rate of success in treatment,
Yeah.
what are we missing here?
I think it's understanding the best practices and the best approaches to take. And I think that when people think of relapse and substance use, they don't think of it as being the same as someone relapsing with asthma, and it is the same. You would never work with someone who's an asthmatic, and if they have another asthma attack, say, well, you failed, you haven't done it right. Restart your counter, go again. You adjust your treatment plan, you focused on what was working, and you kind of build from there. But that medically, that is a relapse. Someone with hypertension having high blood pressure again, that's a relapse, and it's a normal and oftentimes expected. But that's really more in the case of the provider. We need to adjust to make sure that you're successful. And I think for an addiction, it gets handed back to the patient. You've done something wrong. You don't want it enough. You're not ready. You haven't hit bottom. We would never say that with any other medical condition. You would never tell a cancer patient, well, you just don't want it enough yet. So we're not going to do chemo till you show that you really care, you're really motivated. But we do that with addiction, and it's horrible.
It's interesting. This is probably the first time I've ever heard someone reference it this way, because oftentimes when we have these conversations, we talk about the guilt that family members feel, or the shame that they may feel. But I've never actually heard someone say that we as providers are missing it. So what is it that providers need to be doing differently to change the field there?
One of the things I'm big on is reframing. Well, first off, understanding what's taking place in the brain so that we can deliver the best practices and use the research we have. I think reframing of resistance. I think that problem of perceiving resistance is feedback for the practitioner that what we are doing is not effective. And I think we a lot of times take the cop out that, again, they don't want it, they're not ready, they haven't hit bottom, whatever it is. And we don't do that with any other mental health or medical condition where we just blame them and say that they're effectively not ready. We adjust our treatment plan, we figure out what we need to do, what's a good way to engage this individual, look back on what we need to do differently as opposed to, pointing the finger. But I think that comes down to a misunderstanding of addiction. Oh, it's just a choice. And if they would just make better choices, we'd be fine. And I think once it's understood differently, people have a little bit more empathy and understanding for it.
And I know you talked, well, don't let me interrupt.
No,
I get excited, I start jumping in.
Yeah.
I'll follow your lead.
Okay, no, you're good. So again, we talked about the empathy. How do you establish it? I love, Rogerian, Carl Rogers' definition of empathy. So the process of perceiving another person's internal subjective world accurately, including their feelings and meanings while temporarily suspending one's own views and values. And essentially that's the goal behind the drawings, truly taking someone inside of the mind of someone dealing with addiction, what's happening, to really understand it kind of from that perspective. And if you're good with it, I'll jump into that and start doing my bad drawings that I'm so well known for, apparently. That I still haven't gotten better at. If you were here last time, I've not progressed, unfortunately. But all right, so your brain is built up of a multi-trillion neuropathway system, essentially. You got more neuropathways in your brain than there are observable stars in the universe. It's so vast and complex that even your brain forgets where it puts stuff. That's why you'll be having a conversation with someone and you're like, what was the name of that actress? I can't remember. And you move on, your brain doesn't. It keeps checking nearby branches, essentially, trying to find that. And then you're sound asleep at 2 a.m. Oh, it finds it. It was Scarlett Johansson. Runs to the front of the brain, wakes you up at 2 a.m. Hey, here's that thing, you wanted 8 hours ago. And you're like, oh, great, thanks for waking me up. And then it's, also I was in there, I found this traumatic middle school memory, and that time you got embarrassed and remember this, and, it gives you all that kind of random thought that you get in the middle. But all that to say, it's a very vast and complex system. But what's really key with addiction is right here, right where the beginning of one neuron almost touches the end of another one. And if you've heard of a synapse firing, this is where that signal essentially gets sent across. So it leaves one side. That side's known as the axon. It sends a signal. It goes over to the dendrite, which receives it. Once it gets that signal, it processes kind of what to do with it, essentially. It's like a spell check on that's struggling to even read what I'm trying to do. And then you've got the reuptake. And all you need to know here is it's like the recycling center. So signal goes out, attaches to that dendrite for a little bit, tells your brain, hey, do this, goes back into the recycling center for your brain to send out later to send that signal again. Does anyone know any common neurotransmitters that they've heard of? I know you know some, you just are doubting it. One starts with an S. Serotonin, right? So serotonin is actively involved with our mood. So your axons are sending out serotonin. Those temporarily latch onto those dendrites, tell our brain what to do with our mood, and then once they're done, get pulled back into that reuptake so that they can get sent out again later. Some individuals, for whatever reason, we see less serotonin present. What diagnosis do you think might be common with this individual? Depression, right? Yeah, this main theory behind depression. Low levels of serotonin, not enough signals being sent to tell your mood what to work. The most common class of medication for this, SSRIs, if you've ever heard of it, most of them fit into that. It's going to sound like a mouthful, but it's not, I promise. So specific serotonin reuptake inhibitor. But let's break that down. So inhibit, block, reuptake, that's this thing. That's what it does. They block serotonin from being able to get into your reuptake, essentially putting like a lid on it. So the serotonin goes to get recycled. It can't, so it comes back out and it sends those signals for longer than it normally would have. So antidepressants aren't making you happy. The doctor's still going to say you need exercise, sleep, whatever it might be. But you'll get more bang for your buck out of it, essentially, because they can't get recycled as fast. It takes a long time to cap, all of these up, which is why you don't take an antidepressant and you're instantly okay, right? Say give it weeks, months sometimes. Also why if you miss one, you're not just instantly sad, so to speak. But that's how, makes sense? That's how, you all know how antidepressants work. You're all like neuroscientists on the way, see? It's pretty easy. I like to start with serotonin just because it's good at kind of explaining what every single one of them do. Dopamine is the big one with drugs. So often associated with pleasure, it is a part of our reward system. Let me see if I can turn off that. There we go. Stop trying to make my handwriting better. What types of things naturally activate our reward center? What makes us feel great? And we get exercise. There's 3 big ones. That's one of them. What feels great? What do we love doing? Food. Don't pretend. Yeah, there you go. Sex. All right. Okay. So, important to note, these things don't inherently feel good or are rewarding. It's that release of dopamine, a release of all those other neurotransmitters that come out. That is what we're actually enjoying. Without that release, without that dopamine, none of that feels good. You're not motivated to do it, any of that. The brain's essentially internal dog treat or tag that this is important is giving you dopamine. And it could choose anything to tie that chemical to, but it chooses exercise, food, and sex. Why? Why would the brain give you dopamine just for this? Why does it want you to do this? Keep you alive, right? If I can keep you healthy, I can keep you living longer, if I can keep you eating, and if I can get you to have sex, I can make more of my brain, and we can keep this whole thing going, essentially. So it's all rooted in survival, and that's what we've found is that dopamine pairs really strongly with things that are associated with survival. So like a high fatty storage food, really high energy foods, sexual activity, exercise, things that are going to keep us alive. We see surges in dopamine. What drugs do is they trick that system, essentially. And all drugs have this in common, either primarily or indirectly. They flood this system with a ton of dopamine. How would this feel? Great, yeah, it feels amazing. This is the euphoric feeling that drugs often produce and why people tend to enjoy it the first time. And if you've been taught through this program or whatever, you're just going to do drugs and all these terrible things happen, it's very unlikely that's going to be someone's initial experience. The initial experiences are typically super positive. It's typically the best meal they've ever had, better than the best sex they've ever had, better than the best workout they've ever had, and typically no consequences, right? It's typically not like the DEA walks in right then and there and arrests you. Like, it's typically going pretty well. Your friends are doing it, it's cheap, it's affordable, and it feels better than anything else, so what might you do? Do it again. You do it again, you do it again, and why wouldn't you? This works, it feels great, and everyone else is doing it, right? The problem is that the brain is trying to always achieve homeostasis. So it wants things to be even, balanced, and kind of under control. And this is a system, again, the brain normally uses for survival, and it's essentially getting tricked by these different drugs. Whatever they are, they're all releasing dopamine. It's one thing they all have in common. They have different other effects. Some may make you feel relaxed, more alert, but they're all flooding you with this. So what the brain does is it starts to turn off some of the axons. So now the next time you get high, there's not so much dopamine there. It's a little bit less. What do? More, right? And you get into this back and forth. You use more, the brain starts downturning them, making them less strong, less potent, and you get to here, essentially, you would have to use 4 times as much to get the same effects. And I think that's what's important. The same effects. You're not getting 4 times as high. You're not feeling 4 times as good. You're just having to use 4 times to get the same level of high, trying to get close to the way you used to feel back when it started. There's this thought that as the use escalates, it's just this hedonism of just wanting all this strung out pleasure when you're actually just trying to get the same level. It just takes so much more. This is tolerance. So as tolerance is you need more to get the same effect. If it takes you more alcohol to get the same level of buzz than it used to, this is the only reason why. The axons do not send signals as strong as they used to before. That's the only reason that can happen. So tolerance can happen pretty quick to some extent. These things start to get downregulated, and it takes more and more. Then eventually, the brain starts to downturn your dendrites. Now, it doesn't matter how much alcohol is in that system, how much cocaine, how much heroin, whatever it is, how high you can get, this ceiling essentially just starts coming down. And that can be this panic of oh, my drugs aren't working, or maybe I'm not using enough, so the use goes up really high, and this process can happen extremely quick, essentially. But once you get to this stage, it's not euphoric anymore. You can use 10 times the amount of drugs. You can only process what's below the dendrites that are functioning fully, which is very few. You're fighting for just baseline okay. You're just trying to feel remotely all right. The days of being able to have this fun, euphoric high are so gone, and you're having to use just copious amounts of some type of substance just to feel average, essentially. It's a pretty miserable state, and a lot of people don't understand how awful that state really is. If that individual goes to treatment, doesn't have their substances, that dopamine's gone, this is a miserable state to be in. You go to group, you exercise, you see your family, whatever, you get, bloop, you get one little tiny thing of dopamine reward, and even if there's more dopamine there, you don't have the ability to process it. So my first of 2 most important things I think that happen is this. This is called anhedonia, and it's an inability to feel pleasure. Motivation, reward, all the things that dopamine's associated with. They're not ungrateful. They're not in a bad mood. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they're unmotivated. The brain loses the ability to produce and process pleasure that's there. You see their family, their brain doesn't respond the way it's supposed to. You see their kids, doesn't respond the way it's supposed to. Have a great workout, a great conversation. The brain can't produce the dopamine it's supposed to be able to, and even if it does, it doesn't have the ability to process it even if it's there. So you still feel miserable, which makes early treatment especially hard, right? It's not working. I feel worse. I don't feel better. Really setting expectations on the client side, but also the practitioner. Hey, if you're expecting them to just waltz in and be super happy and grateful to be here, that's completely unreasonable as far as the brain's concerned. It can't do that right now. It's going to have a really hard time just feeling kind of remotely okay, so to speak. The brain does not tell you, I'll start fixing things. It's shut all those things off, essentially assuming, oh man, that is a very dented head, but we'll go with it. Again, it's after homeostasis, and it's adjusted, assuming you're going to keep using drugs. So that's its instinct, is telling you, go get more. Go do the thing you've been doing so that we're back in balance again. Or seek something else out that gives us dopamine. Seek out, start binge eating. Start having sex with a bunch of people. Get in a bunch of unhealthy relationships. Do something to produce dopamine. We see that a lot in early recovery. People are extremely drawn towards over-exercising, the types of foods they want to eat, the frequency they want to eat them, and the relationships, right? Like 12-step programs picked up on that quick before the science. Like, all right, our sponsors and sponsees won't stop having sex with each other, and everybody keeps relapsing. Like, let's make it a gender you won't get in a relationship with. Let's try to tell people to stay out of a relationship for a year. That ended up being why. It allows this system to not just switch sources of dopamine, essentially, because if it does, there's no reason to start turning things back on, which it will. It will start turning everything back on, but not if you just essentially find a new source. This idea, I'll just smoke a bunch of weed or I'll just drink, keeps essentially everything shut off. Any questions that you have, or keep going? Or
Oh, this is great.
okay,
No,
okay,
keep going.
All right. I know this is a lot at once, but feel free to ask a question, whether you're up here or out there or wherever.
And we do have microphones going around, so yes, at any point, raise your hand. We'll have a microphone float by. So,
2 parts of the brain I want to talk about: our prefrontal cortex. This is our consequential thinking, logic, weigh the pros and cons, all the good or bad that can happen, how we make choices. And then we've got our midbrain. It houses the limbic system, amygdala, big part here, fight or flight system. So I only drew in half the prefrontal cortex because, again, most of my work's with adolescents. So it's just literally making teachers, providers, everyone repeat a mantra of, like, adolescents have half a prefrontal cortex. Like, just remember that. It is not fully developed yet. So if you're arguing with a kid, whether it's a family member or a student or whatever it won't be, that they're not thinking things through and they're not being rational, like, you're getting frustrated with their brain doing something it can't do yet. You'll understand when you're older does not mean you'll go through life experiences that'll change the way you view the world. And if I just inject those via lecture right now, you'll get it in advance and you won't need those life experiences. No, it means your brain grows into something capable of understanding concepts it can't, not unwilling, can't understand when it's younger. Look back at your outfits, dating choices, hairstyles of when you're an adolescent and see how rational it feels, right? But at the time it did. That brain, it made perfect sense. And then today's brain, we're like, what was I doing and thinking? Because you have a different brain now than you had then. So just remembering that youth are at an extreme disadvantage for conflict, bad decision-making, and substance use because of that. They don't have the same ability to think about it the way an adult would. And it's not defiance or unwillingness, it's truly inability. The brain uses really one system or the other, and it largely regulates that with blood flow, which system it wants to use. The blood carries oxygen, and the oxygen kind of helps and represents the electrical activity that happens there. And what we found is we typically use one or the other of these systems. They don't cooperate very well. We default to logic unless we get stressed or we think we're in danger. The minute we're stressed or we think we're in danger, our brain cuts off blood flow and oxygen, switches to midbrain. So you're driving in your car, someone cuts you off, there's a moment of, I'm in danger. Like, I could die, I could get hit, you switch to fight or flight. But then you don't get hit, but you're in fight or flight. So the fight part of you might have a finger of choice that goes up, or honk, or words of choice, and that's what that is. You are stuck in survival mode, thinking that you need to fight because your life was threatened, but it's not really the same kind of systems that used to trigger it before, so it's trying to figure out, like, okay, well, what do I do with this fight now? And it comes out that way. Then prefrontal cortex hopefully takes over, and you're like, all right, I don't need to wreck my car or do all this, wind up on the news again, whatever it is, and you talk yourself, essentially out of it, hopefully. And that's how those two systems work. With some individuals and not in others, we know predispositions, but we don't know why, and we haven't pinned down how this happens. When this process of the dopamine system starts changing, the brain cuts off blood flow to the prefrontal cortex and pursues more dopamine using the fight or flight system. And for other individuals, that doesn't happen. They keep full use of their prefrontal cortex and can logically decide whether or not they want to continue pursuing that dopamine or not. So you get two individuals who go out for drinks, both just as motivated and genuinely just as motivated. I got a budget, I got to drive home, I have work tomorrow. Both mean it to their core. One of them, when they drink, they get the flood of dopamine, but the prefrontal cortex remains intact. All right, that was my limit, I'm gonna stop, whatever it might be. The second person, the minute the dopamine floods, all those same motivations are there, essentially gets unplugged. And the brain essentially operates like, if I don't get more of this dopamine, I'm gonna die, which makes sense because, again, this is the chemical that tells us you need this to stay alive. It's the same signal that's telling you you have to eat, you have to move, you have to reproduce, all of that. It's that times 100. So it's like more intense than your most intense hunger you've ever had as far as how you have to go after it. And essentially the brain functions like, I'm gonna die if I don't consume as much dopamine as possible. And it's not that those motivations aren't there, they just lose the ability to talk to that part of the brain, essentially, which makes it hard for empathy because the other person's sitting there going, what are you doing? Like, you've got to drive, you've got work, like we talked about this, you're on probation, you've got, again, it's just they can't access that part right there. They're in fight or flight where you don't have the ability to connect with those things, and that's what contributes. Like, we assume that those individuals are thinking with the same part of the brain we're thinking with when we're judging them, not realizing that they're disconnected from that part of the brain. They show that the activity goes down, like it gets shut off like almost entirely. So you can measure how much oxygen's flowing to the prefrontal cortex. And the more you get into it, the scarier it gets. If your brain needs your prefrontal cortex to problem solve to get drugs in addiction, it'll give it back just until the drugs are in hand and then take it away again, essentially. So it only gives you access to your prefrontal cortex, essentially, if it thinks it's going to be necessary to be able to like manipulate or do whatever to get the substance. But it gets pulled out, essentially, and the midbrain just lights up like crazy.
I guess every adult operates with a full PFC logic. They all operate on that versus when you were an adolescent.
We'll talk about that. So the question was, do you always operate as an adult with a full prefrontal cortex? And the answer is no, and we'll use that as a good empathy metaphor. So this effect, this is my second term, which I think is the most important. This effect's called hypofrontality, and it's an inability to use your prefrontal cortex. Not unwillingness. No, that's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't want to think through the consequences. You get essentially your brain gets rewired in a way where you can't use the part you need the most, and you're stuck in this fight or flight. And the more stressful the situation, the more life-threatening it is, the less likely that person's going to be able to abstain from relapsing or being able to engage in recovery, which makes you think about how counterintuitive so many of our interventions are, like the Scared Straight program. Which part of the brain do you think we put those kids into, right? Let's bring kids into a jail, and let's have a bunch of prisoners corner them and scream at them. That is the most immediate way to put someone in fight or flight. The ability to think through or process is immediately gone. It could not be a worse type of intervention to do. And so many interventions are built around, let's stress them out, make them feel bad. And again, we would never do that. There's a treatment center this day where it's like you start on the floor, if you work hard enough, you eventually get a cot, and then you get a bed. Like, we would never tell a cancer patient, right? Like, all right, you start on the floor, and then if it goes to stage 3, you can have a cot, and then if the tumor gets this big, then you can have a bed. But until now, like, you sit down there because, you're not doing what you need to do. And then we wonder why the two most common reasons why 7 out of 10 people in the US do not complete their treatment programs is due to chronic noncompliance, fighting, or leaving against medical advice. Flight. So the two most, 70% of people fight or flight from their treatment centers, and then we sit there, oh, well, they didn't want it, they didn't this or that, not realizing like the brain did exactly what it's supposed to do when it's stressed and it's in an addictive state. It ran away or it fought. And then we blame, them essentially. So people who have dealt with addiction are like, I get this. And then, you come down, you get the prefrontal cortex back, and now you can process everything you just did and everyone you just hurt and all of the consequences that are real. And the stress of just that alone is enough to trigger going right back because it's just so overwhelming being able to now process something you couldn't process. But many people are skeptical, right? That just sounds like a cop-out and an excuse. So even if you've never dealt with addiction, you have experienced hypofrontality. So this is to your question. The same effect happens when we get really, really mad. Think about the types of things that you say or you do at your absolute angriest, right? Like we pick fights with drywall, we slam doors, we tell loved ones super, super hurtful things. And I can't think of anyone that would be willing or motivated to come up here and say, here's what I did at my angriest. Here's what I told a loved one. Here's how I acted, right? But we want people in recovery to do that, right? And I don't think anyone would say how I act at my angriest represents who I am as a person, that represents my values. Most of us carry a tremendous amount of shame for how we act in those moments, and we want to keep it hidden. Just realizing that's the state that addiction is for years, months. I mean, you get stuck in that state for such a long time. That was just a temporary little window, that you've experienced. And just seeing how bad your decision-making is in that state, just imagine someone saying like, oh, you make bad choices. Not understanding like it is truly a loss of control when someone is stuck essentially in that state. It's also why you should never try to do conflict resolution, counseling, anything if you or the other person is angry, right? No spousal argument has ended with someone yelling, you know what, you're right. It's like we calm down, I'm sorry for what I said, I thought about it, and that's getting enough oxygen essentially back into the prefrontal cortex, but it's not gonna happen essentially in that moment. So there's my bad but educational drawings. Any questions that you wanna go into now, or
I have so
as we
many
go?
questions. As I know, there's a lot of excitement here in the audience. So we're going to have a volunteer pass around the microphone. We do have audience online that's streaming so that for their benefit, they can hear the question and also respond. It's also a good time to remind people that because we are streaming live, if there's any personal shares, we just always recommend that people share that it's a loved one or a friend, and we'll try to keep their anonymity there present. But to kick off a couple questions, you talk about the youth brain development, early addiction, the impact, but oftentimes we see adults and they have been maybe in active addiction. And so, we may be talking to a 30, 35-year-old who may have had a long run in addiction. So what happens to that brain that has had this addictive power holding it for so long?
Unfortunately, addiction that starts in adolescence and gets treated in adulthood is worst case scenario, so to speak, because the adolescent brain is super neuroplastic and the prefrontal cortex is still developing. So the brain rewires around new processes, new activity, new languages. That's why it's easier to start them younger, faster. Your brain's kind of like hardening concrete, super soft and malleable when you're young, and then when you're older, it's kind of like chipping away. You still do it, it's just harder. So what happens is an adolescent's brain rewires super fast around addiction, this reward issue. Also, the dopamine response is stronger for kids. Any of the consequences or aversions are actually smaller. So we normally think of kids as being really resilient, and that's a good thing. They can go through hardship, traumatic events, and they show the ability to be resilient. But resiliency is also a risk factor in a way, because it's all of the natural consequences telling you not to do this, those get shrunk too. I can handle it. It's not too bad. I'll push through, persevere. I'm not worried about my grades or my family, and kind of continue forward. So it's like it rewires really fast. And then if you don't give them access to prevention or treatment resources while it's still in that state, it kind of hardens in that addiction state. So it's still, you can still undo it, but it's harder in a way.
What's, in your experience, has there been changes in approaches when you understand someone has had a long addictive cycle or a pattern? Is there innovative approaches? Is there anything that's being done now?
Yeah, well, it's overwhelmingly, it's empathy. I mean, that sounds, oversimplified, but, I'll share this slide kind of as we go. This is how I end almost all my presentations. This is one or more studies on empathy when it comes to working with people with substance use disorders. So these showed the strongest predictor of whether or not a patient with a substance use disorder would be successful in the treatment program they went to was whether or not the counselor had a high level of empathic listening and listening skills when they worked with that patient. And that worked not only in clinical settings, but in real world settings, their ability to complete and stay abstinent after. This study showed success rates ranging from 25 to 100%, depending on the use of empathic listening. So what that means is the counselors who were poor empathic listeners, only 25% of their patients completed, and the highest empathic listening counselors, 100%. Every single patient they worked with, the entire study successfully completed the program. We did this thing called Project Match. We want to figure out, is 12-step facilitation, motivational enhancement, or CBT the best for treating addiction? Or if we pair people based on certain assessment characteristics, if we match them, can we improve the success rates? And basically, empathic counselors screwed up the study. If they were an empathic counselor, every single approach worked. And if they were non-empathic, none of them worked. So it frustrated the research, but at the same time, what they learned is like, basically anything evidence-based works if you have this skill. And if you don't, it doesn't matter how well researched the work is, it doesn't work if you don't bring that essentially to the session. And not only that, go ahead, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, is it a stretch then to say that you don't need a degree, you don't need a license, you could be a family member? Showing empathy is something that anyone can do.
Yeah, and some things are counterintuitive. So like some degrees did show that they would help on the empathy side, but not necessarily the practicing side. But the one that stood out to me the most was they found that individuals with personal experience in recovery actually score lower on perceived empathy than counselors that have no personal experience.
Okay, you have to explain that.
Yeah, so it seems very counterintuitive. And that was the original thought, was like why we created these other licenses, was the belief that like you have to have this experience to help someone. But what happens is like, what worked for you and your experience, and just projecting that onto someone else is not empathy. That's shorthanding. Oh yeah, I've done those drugs too. I know your story. That's not truly understanding what it meant to them, what their experience was like, what their hardship was like, what their goals are. It's assuming that everything is the same because we both drank or we both did drugs. It helps with rapport, which is the second most important thing after empathy. So people are motivated to work with individuals that have it, but when you actually overuse it, it becomes quite harmful if not used correctly.
Now, I want to circle back to Project Empathy, which is something that you had talked about earlier, but I want to leave room for questions. So if you have a question, we'll have this microphone running around. We have time for maybe about 2 or 3 questions, but we've got an expert here, and throw anything that you've got in mind.
I'm going to throw these up as these are going, because these are great.
Thank you, Drew. So I'm curious, talking about the things that don't work, that are used so many times, the 12-step programs and different things. What do you all utilize for recovery at Phoenix House?
Yeah, so when we were heavy into treatment, we used positive psychology and solution-focused principles. So we ran residential treatment programs that had essentially no consequences. Any punitive element was completely stripped out. The staff could issue strengths tickets and incentives when people were engaged in the behavior they needed to do, again, tapping into the reward system in like a very positive way. And what has been shown overwhelmingly the best and fastest way to change behavior by rewarding what you want to see instead of penalizing what you don't. And people were terrified of that. They're like, you have 32 adolescents dealing with substance use and mental health, and there's no write-ups and we had less incidents and a higher completion rate, well beyond the national average when we were doing that. Like, we were able to keep kids in the program for so much longer, higher completion rates, because like if these consequences and punitive measures worked, you wouldn't need them. And there's very little research that suggests like punitive intervention and criminal justice has any meaningful impact in a positive direction, especially with substance use. So it's centered around that, figuring out what their strengths are, what their goals are, assuming good intent. The way you would treat someone dealing with depression, cancer, that same empathy and compassion is lost on individuals with substance use disorders because their symptoms are so antisocial, we forget their symptoms. We think that they're being bad or they're being rude or they're criminals or they're whatever and not realize, oh, no, those are symptoms of a disease that we are supposed to be treating. So if it's there, we're not doing our jobs instead of just saying, like, you need to be respectful, get out, kind of thing. But we weren't anti-12-step. Like, if it worked, we used it. And that's also what the data showed. The less you pushed it, the more likely people were to engage with it. And it could be very successful, but not when essentially forced.
That was my question. If you
Okay.
paired it with 12-step
Yeah,
or
yeah,
not.
that's what they found.
'cause
They
it
found
was-
that in the long-term recovery, those that were engaged in 12-step facilitation were doing really well, but it wasn't those that were given that curriculum directly, essentially. It was those that found it autonomously by their own, choice.
So maybe how do you approach somebody that's maybe an adult and then a kid that is active in addiction? I mean, how do you get this information to them or actually get started with them? I guess would be the question. Maybe you could take an adult who's active in addiction versus a young adult.
I
or
mean, yeah,
child.
for me, I always start from a place, and what we typically teach is assume a good goal. Because I've never worked with an individual where their goal wasn't very productive. We get distracted by the means that they're trying to achieve it. I've worked with college students that were using because they wanted to do well on their tests and study. I've met people that used because they didn't want to feel anxious at a party. I've met people that used because they wanted to fit in. I've met people that used because they had horrific flashbacks and visualizations if they did. Those are all really healthy goals. But if we don't figure out what it is they're after, we can't help them find healthy alternatives or new ways to meet it. If we just go, oh, well, you need to stop using, and here's what you do to stop using, assuming that the person that's trying to do well in school versus the person that's anxious in social situations versus the person that's trying to relax, that same intervention will work for all of them is pretty misguided, right? It's a lot of treatment became a shoe store that sells size 9. And if that was your size, it worked really well. And if it wasn't, it was just well, you need to stretch or shrink or find a way to make it work instead of figuring out, okay, what is this person after? And it's really healthy and they have good resources. Now, how do we connect them with that? But it's got to start with figuring out what they're after and assuming good intention.
So, and also I'm curious about, when the system's kind of broken or not working right, as you describe, and I've heard the treatment programs have to be minimum of 90 days. There's no real magic to 30 other than insurance covers it. But how long does it take to get the system firing normally again, typically?
Yeah, your 90-day mark is great. That's what the research backs. Most of it's on adults, so a lot of it's we've got to assume it works well for kids until we can get better data on it. But most of it showed anything less than 90 days, you're going to get the same results as if it was 1 to 2 days. It's really not that meaningful. The dopamine system shows the ability to fully heal in virtually everyone in about 12 to 18 months. And that doesn't mean no progress until then. That's full restoration, functioning as it was before substances interfered. And different drugs and potential overdoses and things like that can cause damages that may not come back. But that system and the hypofrontality and the reward system changes shows an incredible ability to go fully back to normal in what I would consider a relatively quick time for how long a lot of the people in most of the studies had been using. To see it come back in about a year to a year and a half is pretty remarkable.
Sorry, this is just fascinating.
No,
I got a
yeah.
lot of questions. So do you see now today that with as many young people are vaping
Yes.
and using nicotine,
Yeah.
that this is now, I'm assuming it's prevalent with nicotine too,
Yeah,
right?
and
Same way.
that's the thing. Your body doesn't necessarily distinguish dopamine's dopamine once you get to that point, right? So you've now wired in where there's a huge deficit of dopamine and things that help you relax and things like that, and it's going to take extremely high levels to move that needle again. So you can see where essentially those types of substances become gateway drugs essentially really fast and wire the brain for it. But with vaping, vaping and THC, you get contradictory gateway drug stuff. You get most people that vape or use marijuana do not go on to use other drugs or smoke cigarettes, but those that do, virtually every single one of them started with marijuana or vaping, essentially. So it's just kind of like if you've got the predispositions, it is an extremely high probability it's going to lead to further substance use, but if you don't, odds are it may stay there.
We have time for one more question.
So when you have an adult who's in flight mode, right? If you are like a bystander, a spouse, a friend, and you're there with them, like what kind of tools can you do, or can you do anything?
Very little. Yeah, oxygen and time and space. Like attempting to rationally talk to them, they don't have that part of the brain. So a lot of times just like let them walk around, give them space. They need to be able to breathe. And then a lot of times we go back too soon. So it starts okay and then it goes out. But the safer and as stress-free as environment can feel, the better, because it's responding to perceived danger, right? Which is why when I work with like psychiatric hospitals where they de-escalate kids by having all the staff get around them in the corner, or or like having the restraints in their hand, like you're guaranteed to escalate them beyond. And we would get kids from those types of environments where like they had to be restrained every day. And we were a no restraint facility, hands off no matter what. And we never had to do anything with those kids because we never put them in an environment where they felt threatened or perceived that they were in danger. I think so much of it is we put people in threatening situations where we just don't give them enough oxygen and time to get that part of their brain back, essentially. A good night's rest does a lot too. I mean, that's so many conflicts and stuff. You wake up and you can't even get in the headspace you were in the night before because that part of your brain's totally offline now. And you're like, how did I even arrive at that conclusion that was a good idea, kind of thing?
Drew, as we wrap up, I want to extend the invitation, invite you a third and fourth and fifth time. Because this is amazing information. But tell us a little bit about Project Empathy. Tell us about Phoenix House.
Yeah, so, we're doing all prevention and education now. So in Dallas, Austin, and Houston, we've got prevention staff that go into schools, K through 12, community centers, and deliver the resources, again, that assume good goals. People just need the right resources. So what kind of education, coping skills, social skills, life skills, proactive anger management, activities we can engage people in. And then through Project Empathy, we work with professionals, adults, community members, counselors, organizations, legal professionals to bring essentially a full 2-hour workshop on all of this information so people can leave really understanding the neuroscience behind it, what works, what doesn't. And then we also have a lot of follow-ups. And if people are interested in integrating those positive psychology approaches that we used in treatment, those started as like workplace tools and just quality of life interventions. If they want to just build it, from that way, essentially promote well-being and thriving in whatever setting, we do those workshops as well, anywhere.
Fantastic. And is there a space where people can go to get more information?
Yeah, our website, so phoenixhousetx.org, and then I can also put my contact information up as well. So that's my email address and phone number if you're interested in the services that we offer or getting the workshop scheduled somewhere.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
So if you're joining us online, just know that you just heard a great conversation from Drew, who is in this passionate space about prevention, empathy, changing the platform in terms of how we approach those in addiction. And this is part of what the CARES program is about. We are building a space where we can provide the education, we can develop supports, and then also provide resources. So when you're in need, you know that there are spaces that we can turn to and information that is available that helps destigmatize this journey. You're not alone. This is a community. So again, we are the CARES program, Communities and Relatives Empowered for Support. We meet here every Monday, 7 p.m. Doors open at 6:30, and we start streaming live at 7 p.m. on the dot. So we are grateful. Thank you, Drew, again for joining us. And to everyone here and those online, if this is your first time joining us, we just want to say a simple message. Welcome home. Stay with us. Keep coming back. Bring more people too. If this is a benefit to you, it'll be a benefit to those around you as well. So we hope to see you next Monday, and thanks for joining us.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah, let's definitely.